Witchcraft and witches are popular themes within movies and TV shows. They've graced our screens since the times of Bewitched in the 1960s, through to Charmed in the 1990s, up to the modern day with shows like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and Agatha All Along. And as someone who is incredibly passionate about learning and practicing witchcraft, I always ask myself, what did these shows get right about real-world magic and witchcraft? And today we're going to be talking about one of the most highly requested shows I've ever received, and that is What Agatha All Along Got Right About Witchcraft. Now, for anyone who is new here, hello, my name is Hearth. I'm a practicing witch and I am passionate about witchcraft, its study, and sharing information with all of my lovely subscribers. Now, of course, it is important for me to say here that these movies and TV shows are fiction. This is not a documentary, this is not real life. However, they're drawing their information about witchcraft from real witchcraft sources, the witch trials, and active magical practitioners. And this is the bit that I find the most fascinating. A lot of these shows and movies, let's think The Craft, for instance, will actually have witchcraft consultants to share real information about witchcraft to make the setting of that show or movie feel more grounded in reality. And many of the shows, even if they don't outwardly say it, will have taken influence directly from modern and historical magical practitioners, and this is what we want to be focusing on. And I am going to have to split this video into several parts, because when I say that Agatha All Along is full of information, I really mean it. Today we're going to be talking about episode 1 and episode 2, but if you would like to be updated when I release new episodes in this series, feel free to subscribe and click the bell notification, and you should, fingers crossed, be notified when I release a new episode. Now, of course, I'm not affiliated with Agatha All Along or any of the companies involved. I'm just a very passionate person. So I hope that you'll join me as we take this journey down the witch's road with an open mind, and let's get started. I'm very excited about this. So what is Agatha All Along? It's a show on Disney Plus that released, I believe, in September, October of this year, so it's pretty recent for me to be able to get round to it, because usually it takes me forever. And it's actually a spin-off of an earlier show called WandaVision, which came out in, I believe, 2020. WandaVision is a spin-off show from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is then based off the Marvel Comic Universe. And while I don't think this information is necessary for you to know, it can be useful when going into Agatha All Along. It is a pretty good standalone show, and I don't think you need to have much pre-existing information, but there are a few references that you might miss or not quite understand if you've not seen at least WandaVision. So just bear that in mind going into it. I would say, though, that you'd probably enjoy the show even if you didn't have that prior knowledge. But I would recommend that you watch Agatha All Along before watching this video, or you might be pretty confused. So let's start at the very beginning with episode 1. Now, this episode is a little bit confusing if you aren't aware of what's already happening, so some context. Agatha Harkness is the main character, hence Agatha All Along, and she is a witch, and a very powerful one at that. In the first episode, however, she's under a spell that is making her believe that she is a detective. She has no memory of the magical world, and actually she's living in a fantasy world that doesn't even exist. However, even when she's under the thrall of this spell, aspects of her magical life start appearing. And at first I thought, this is really weird, where is the magic going to start? But almost straight away, we can see that they have put so much effort into learning the magical properties of items, of objects, of symbolism, and adding them into the series, and that always blows me away every single time. So while at work attempting to solve a crime, she finds a locket. This locket is in the mud at a crime scene, and she takes it to a local jeweler's who looks it over and gives her some information about it. We learn that this locket is 17th century, likely from New England, and it's made of cowrie shell. Now, these are all really significant, and at face value, you might completely miss it. So we're looking at an object that was made in New England, around the Salem part of Massachusetts in the 17th century. This is exactly the time of the Salem witch trials, and this is where Agatha really comes from. Her story is based in this Salem time period. Now, cowrie shell is a really powerful object within magic. It is used around the world by many different traditions and belief systems, many different teachings and practices. They are often used as a form of divination, but as the shell itself, they are used to represent love, fertility, and prosperity. And so to make a locket in New England around the Salem period out of such a powerful magical item is really significant. On the surface of that locket is actually a representation of the triple goddess, the maiden, mother, and crone. Now, this symbol is used a lot within modern witchcraft. She is often known as the triple goddess or the moon goddess, and it's believed that she can actually be several different figures. Lots of goddesses around the world are triple in nature, two of the most famous being that of Hecate and Brigid. These are two very popular goddesses for witches to work with because they often resonate deeply with the energy that we want to connect with. Hecate is considered a goddess of the crossroads and of magic. Brigid is considered a goddess of healing, of smithcraft, of poetry, and she is also the goddess of the celebration Imbolg, which happens on the 1st or 2nd of February within the modern pagan wheel of the year. As you can see, there's already a lot of associations going on in here. The triple goddess is often a figure that is called upon by many witches, especially those within Coven environments and Wiccan environments. She is often the counterpart to the horned god in many celebrations, and she is a very potent figure for the magical community and something incredibly recognizable. Any symbol that you see that is a full moon with 2 crescent moons on either side is a representation of the triple goddess. And the fact that all of that is crammed into the first section blew my mind instantly, and I was immediately hooked. Now, within that locket is actually a piece of hair. Now, while for the purpose of the show, I believe that it means something different, I feel I should point out that hair being used in lockets is really commonplace within witchcraft as a way of attaching that energy onto a specific person. Now, hair is considered a taglock. I have entire videos on some of these topics that I will link in the description box if it does pique your interest and you want to learn a little bit more. But a taglock is an item that directly links to another person. They're usually either personal effects or bodily fluids and objects. So this could include hair clippings, nail clippings, saliva, blood, other bodily fluids, I'm sure you can think of a few, as well as signatures, photographs, objects that belonged to them, and pieces of paper where writing has been written by them. These things can all be used to attach a working onto another person. And so when it comes to creating a locket, it is something that you can use as a remote spell. So the purpose of this is that you are charging that locket with your energy for a particular purpose, and that energy is directed towards a particular person whose taglock would be in that locket. So for instance, if you wanted to offer protection to someone, you might want to be wearing a locket for protection or creating a protective jar, and then inside that jar are the personal effects or taglocks of that person. So while that's not necessarily where it goes in this particular episode, I do think that is important and useful to point out for anyone who is generally curious. Now, Agatha takes this locket away with her, and eventually the spell upon her is broken by a boy that we will refer to as Teen, as that is the name that he's given for the majority of the series. Now, once this spell is broken, we start seeing more and more information about witchcraft and magic. Firstly, in order to break the spell, this boy has had to use magic in order to do it. So we're seeing that there are other people within this world that are also witches, even if some of them are not as strong or as knowledgeable as others. Now, of course, Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, is also a witch, but if you weren't already aware of the pre-existing information, then that would be complete news to you. But this is a world and this is a place that is full of witches, and that's going to be really important. Now is the first mention that we get of an object called the Darkhold. Now, the Darkhold was a pivotal object at the end of WandaVision, and it is essentially a book of dark magic spells. And Agatha was once the owner of said book. Now, this isn't necessarily important at the start of the series, but I do think it's important for me to mention that this is based on a witch's grimoire. And I do believe it's more of a grimoire than a book of shadows, because the content is designed to be read by someone else. So when we practice witchcraft, we can make our own spells, we can adapt spells that we find elsewhere. We might want to be carrying out divination in the form of tarot reading or scrying or rune reading, and that information can just be kept within our own minds, but it's really useful to have it written down in a format that we can look back on at a later point. That could be in a digital form, that could be in a physical form, but this is referred to as a Book of Shadows. It's essentially a magical journal. Inside the book are all the spells that we've written or edited, the spells that we've carried out and how successful they are, the recipes for different incenses and oil blends. We might want to write down the different signs and omens that we've experienced, the strange oddities or perhaps even the hauntings and the spirits that we might experience. It's a way of keeping track of our progress within our magical journey and allows us to look back on it at a later point. This is slightly different than a grimoire. So a grimoire is a book of spells and magical information, but the difference here is that a grimoire is designed to be read by someone else. It is essentially a textbook, a guidebook for future witches and future readers. And that is the primary distinction, and it's what makes me think that the Darkhold is actually designed to be a grimoire, read by someone else, rather than a Book of Shadows, which is more of a hodgepodge magical journal. So just as an example, a book like this on moon spells would be considered a grimoire as it's designed to be read by someone else. But the author probably has their own Book of Shadows, which just documents their own personal practice for their own personal use. So I thought that was interesting, even though you might not need to know any of that information. Throughout the series, time and time again, we get jokes, we get mentions, we get little comments that tie back to the witch trial period. And the first one actually appears in this episode where another witch tells Agatha that she should, quote, burn or hang or drown, end quote. And I actually think this is a real tell of how much research they actually did on witchcraft. A lot of people assume that all witches were burned at the stake, right? It's the thing that we're always told. There are many slogans out there that are written on t-shirts that say, we are the granddaughters of the witches they couldn't burn. The reality is, most witches were never burned in the first place. And this is definitely a really big misconception that so many people have, understandably so, because the witch trials happened so long ago that people tend to forget about it. The distinction between the way accused witches were treated will vary depending on where you are in the world. And it's also important to note that witch trials still happen to this day. We aren't free of them just because the Salem witch trials happened in the 17th century, or the Pendle witch trials is a long forgotten memory. Witch trials will still happen in some countries around the world. When we're talking about historical witch trials, the way the accused were treated very much depended on where you are in the world, the religion under which you were tried, as well as the time period where this took place. If you were tried at the very beginning of this witch hysteria, you were likely to have harsher sentences and you were likely to be more readily accused. Whereas if you were to be tried at the very end, it was likely that your case would more likely be thrown out than not. If you were tried under the Holy Roman Empire, your case would likely be treated as heresy. Whereas if you were tried elsewhere, such as in North America or in England, you would likely be tried for the outcome of your actions. It wasn't heresy. It could be attempted murder, it could be attempted theft, it could be harm against another person or mental torment, but you weren't tried for heresy, and that's a big distinction. Under the Holy Roman Empire, if you were tried for heresy, you would be burned at the stake. If you were tried for murder, you would more likely be hanged. And so the majority of accused witches, especially in England and North America, were never burned at the stake. The only exception is actually Scotland. Now, Scotland had a few very big witch trials. One that I've spoken about previously was the Pittenweem trial, and they had a different policy. You were still hanged like you would be in North America or England, but once you were hanged, your body was then burned. And this was an extra layer that they added on to make sure that no funny business happened after you were dead. They knew that you were gone. Now, it's a dense topic, but I do think it's one that's really, really important to talk about, because a lot of people today have a complete misunderstanding over the witch trial period, and they completely believe that all witches were women, which they definitely weren't, and that all witches were burned at the stake, which unfortunately was a horrific death. All of them were, but it just isn't accurate to history. Now, I know that that was a bit of a tangent for me here, but I do think it's important for me to add in, just to show you how much effort and information they really put into this series. It is completely bonkers to me. And then at the very end of the episode, we have mention of the Salem 7. While it's not important in this episode, it will be in the next one, so I'm going to mention it now. And they are a very ominous series of 7 figures, hooded, cloaked beings that are going to be really important later on. And then we get to the outro. Now, you might think that the outro is something I don't really need to talk about, but bloomin' hell did they do well on this outro. Every outro, I believe anyway, for as far as I've gotten so far in the series, has different music on it, and the outro music is all related to witchcraft. So the first one, I believe, is Season of the Witch, which was done by Lana Del Rey. That's it. And that song is all about witches and witchcraft. And then on the screen, while this music is playing, is real information about witchcraft, as well as pop culture figures that are witches. So there's Lisa from The Simpsons dressed up as a witch. You can see newspaper articles about witchcraft, web pages about modern witches, and this really cemented to me that they had done their research, because it's so easy to take stereotypes and run with it, and you'll see mention of stereotypes in just a minute. I thought this was absolutely incredible, but they've done a lot more than that, and that I think is why this has been the most requested, well, almost the most requested show I've ever been asked to talk about, because there are so many references and it's clear they've done so much work. Now, episode 2 is where we get into the nitty-gritty. Here is where we first learn about the Witch's Road. Now, the Witch's Road is a journey that witches go on to gain power, and it is an incredibly dangerous and incredibly secretive process. And Teen asks Agatha how he can walk the road, and Agatha realizes this is perfect. I can get everything I want by walking the road, but I can't do it alone, and so a coven of witches needs to be formed for them to be able to do this. Now, as Agatha and the Teen are kind of going back and forth about whether she should give him any information about the road, why does he want to walk the road, he says, quote, "Research can only take you so far," end quote. And this might seem so trivial, but it is also true in real magical practice. There are no shortcuts. There are no fast ways you can get anywhere. You need to be willing to put in the dedication, put in the time, put in the practice, and most importantly, put in the real work. And I've noticed, especially in the last 5 years since lockdown, a lot of people want to be spoon-fed information. They want quick ways to get what they want. And the simple fact is that you're never going to be able to build a stable, solid, reliable magical practice on shortcuts and cheap ways of doing it. There's no way of getting around the fact that you need to be doing your research, you need to be putting your time, your energy, your patience, your practice into the art of witchcraft. It is, after all, a craft. And so I like that they kind of snuck this in as well, because Agatha, being the older, more experienced magical practitioner, is saying whoa, kid, why do you want to be doing this? It's a big risk and there are no shortcuts. And she actually says almost exactly this. She says, quote, "Oh, so you want a shortcut," end quote. And it's just so significant to me, and it really struck a chord. And I know it's so trivial, but it just shows, I think there was definitely at least one real practitioner that went into this show, and I'm going to have to check all of the credits to see if it's mentioned. If it is, I will put their names here, name or names, depending on how many people it is. But I feel like there was definitely someone involved from the magical community. Whether they are mentioned in the credits or not, I'm not sure, but yeah, interesting. I also think it's really cool to mention that you can see loads of little Easter eggs dotted around. So in Teen's jumper, sweater, whatever you want to call it, he actually has a pentacle or a pentagram sewn into the front of it. And if you look at the staging of a lot of the scenes, there'll be little things that as a practitioner you notice and you go, "Oh my god, that's so cool. That's awesome. They put that in there. Oh, this is so cool." And you can go through and you can spot it all. So if you've already watched it and you fancy going back and watching it again, you might find things that you never noticed. But here is where it starts getting a little bit nitty-gritty, and we start seeing that there's something else going on under the surface. When Agatha asks Teen what his name is, he's starting to give her information. She can't hear any of it. All of this information is hidden by a spell, and Agatha has no idea why. It's pretty obvious that the boy doesn't know why either, and so Agatha just goes on and pretends like it's not happening, but it's really significant here. We have a concealment spell being placed on this teenager to stop him from sharing his information to anyone around him, seemingly. And at this point, I'm wondering whether this might have something to do with the idea of names holding power. So I've not watched the entirety of the series, by the way, as I'm talking about this. I've watched the first few episodes. I'm kind of doing this in chunks as I go. So I'm not really sure entirely yet where this is going to go in the future. But at the minute, it feels very much like it is a Rumpelstiltskin names hold power kind of a situation. So within witchcraft, names are very, very significant. In coven environments or in groups, online or within working space, many practitioners have what's known as a craft name. Now, a craft name is an alternative name to your birth name that is used within craft circles, and you'll often see this in the names of authors. So these names will often surround the natural world, they'll often surround colours, they'll often surround animals. Some of the most popular authors out there will have these craft names being used in replacement for their real name in books. And this was done for a few reasons. So the first was because witchcraft is still considered a taboo in a lot of different areas. It is considered something that is dangerous, and especially if you live in the Bible Belt or if you live in an area that is particularly religious or where people are not so nice, it is a safety issue. And so using your fake name, your craft name on your published works means that you are protected within your own space and environment. That's really important. They are also used so that if you have two Susans or two Garys in a coven environment, one of them may be called, I don't know, Marigold Silver Moon and Lily of the Hearth or something. You'll find that they will use these craft names as a way of identification in a group where maybe there's multiple people with the same name. Another reason why it's done is because names hold power, and we see this when it comes to working with spirits, servitors, familiars, and especially when we're working with true names, that becomes even more the case. So often when you're working with a servitor, you will give it a name. That name then holds power over that spirit that you have created. So a servitor is a man-made spirit. You have created that servitor from your energy for a specific purpose, and you have given it a name. And that name may be drawn onto a piece of clay that is used as a sigil. It might be on a piece of paper. It might just be a name that you know, and that name is then used to control that servitor. Your spirit familiar may well also give you a name that you can work with them through. And by using this name, you can summon them into that space. You can request that they work with you. You can direct them towards a specific goal. Names have power. And when you are working with demons, when you're working with the fair folk, they will often not give you their real name because they know that once you have their real name, you will have power and influence over them that you wouldn't have otherwise. This goes both ways too. So I would not recommend giving your full, your real, and especially not your true name to a spirit or an entity, or in the case of a true name, even another person. So I know that I'm going to be asked, and I've mentioned it quite a few times on the live streams, but your true name is believed to be the name that is given to the energy that makes up your being. It is not the name you were given at birth. It is not your name from a past life. It is the name of the essence of who you are through every single lifetime going back to the beginning of time. And I do know one person who has found their true name, and it takes a lot of past life regression, a lot of meditation, a lot of work to be able to do it. This is the name that represents all of the energy that makes up who you are fundamentally. And so if someone else were to be given that name, they would then have power over everything that you are. And so true names are a real thing that you don't tell anyone. Spouses don't even tell their partners their true name. It is very much kept to yourself for safety's sake. And I suspect that that's what's happening here, because he is not being allowed to give his name. Or at the very least, other people aren't permitted from hearing his name, which makes me think it's going to be really significant, and it's probably because names hold power. The conversation then continues. We get a lot of information in just really brief conversations in this show, which is fascinating to me. But it continues with Agatha asking what Teen knows about covens, and he says, quote, "Oh, that they're drawn together by fate, the truest form of sisterhood," end quote. Essentially, they need a coven to be able to access the road. But this does lead to even more deep diving information that we can fully go down the rabbit hole into. So a coven is not just sisterhood. It's kind of a misconception that witches are only women. That just isn't the case. Witchcraft is gender neutral. Witch is a gender neutral term, so you can refer to yourself as a witch regardless of how you identify if you choose to. Now, covens are very varied depending on the tradition that you are a part of, where you are in the world, the style of coven. So this is definitely not going to cover all coven options out there. But for the most part, a coven is a group of magical practitioners that comes together to perform spells and rituals to manifest their goal in a powerful way. Now, a coven can be any number of different practitioners. It could be 2 or 3 practitioners. You can have 13 practitioners. That's a really, really popular number. Some covens have dozens of members, and members will come and go as and when they need to. Some covens are considered akin to a found family. Others serve a specific purpose. So covens at universities or open covens may be more about getting people from the community involved in the magical practice rather than having a set group that is like a close-knit friendship or family members. Some covens are open, so they invite anyone to be able to come in and join and participate, whereas some covens are closed and they have a complex initiatory time period, often of a year and a day before you can join that coven, to make sure that your energy matches the energy of everyone else, because the goal is everyone in that coven comes together to manifest results strongly. And so you need to be working in similar ways, you need to be having similar processes, otherwise it can get really difficult and you can get kind of bashing of heads together, which isn't ideal. Some covens will have specific deities, spirits, or familiars and servitors that they work with. Other covens will be secular in nature. Some will be digital only. Others will meet on a weekly or monthly basis. Commonly, covens will at least meet at the Sabbats, sometimes the Esbats, which are the full moons, and they will perform their rituals as and when they meet and join together. Though practitioners can do their working separately from the coven as well. You aren't tied into just working with the coven. As you can see, it's a little complicated, there's a lot going on here, but at its very core, all members of that coven are putting their energy towards a singular set goal. And that means you can raise a lot of energy, and that means that you can often be more relaxed in a coven environment because you know that if you do something wrong as an individual, or you aren't particularly good at raising your energy yet, you have perhaps 12 other people who are there to step in and say, it's okay, we can do this instead. It's okay, I'll sort that out. This is how you do this, let me help. And so for a lot of people, it does offer additional reassurance as well. And to walk the road, they need a coven. But Agatha doesn't have a coven, so they need to go and find some witches. And then it is said, quote, wherever you are, a coven there shall be. It's the coven stead rule. Within any 3-mile radius, there will be a collection of witchy enough people to form a coven, end quote. Now, there are no set rules for covens. There is nothing to determine what every coven should do. So there's no kind of coven stead rule system in real magic. But covens do go by their own rules. The interesting thing to me, though, about this is, as in the real life, you're likely to walk past witches and not even realise that you're walking past them. Now, some people are very open about their magical practice. Some people will share it in the things that they wear, the way that they dress, the jewellery that they put on, perhaps the makeup that they wear. They will proclaim that they are a witch. They will have the tattoos, whatever it is people feel comfortable with, right? But not everyone is going to be like that. There are many people whom you would walk past on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps you sit next to them on the bus every single day and you would have no idea that they were a witch. Because there are no determining characteristics as to what a witch should look like. We are not green-skinned and long-nosed. I mean, some of us probably have long noses, but it isn't a defining characteristic. And so I like the fact that they added this in, that, yeah, you might at face value not think that there are any other witches in this area besides Teen and Agatha, but there are definitely going to be people hidden away. Their first stop is at a psychic reading shop, and inside there is a lady who gives them a crystal ball reading. And it is complete nonsense. And sadly, in the real world, this happens way too often. If you were to walk to someone on the street and ask their opinion on fortune telling, they'd probably laugh at you. They would probably have a picture of a stereotype in their head of someone ripping you off and stealing your money. There are many legitimate mediums and tarot readers, But unfortunately, there are too many people who do what's known as hot and cold reading that makes the entire topic of it become a laughingstock for many people. And unfortunately, that stereotype makes it really difficult for real psychics, real mediums, and real readers to be able to share their skill and to be able to garner customers, because there is such a bad stereotype because of these fake readers. It is important for me to say though that hot and cold reading is actually something that we will do every single day completely naturally. It isn't something that most people are actually aware that they're doing. You are essentially gaining information about the people you're talking to and your environment through both social cues, behavior, as well as the way someone looks. And many readers will incorporate hot and cold reading into their practice completely accidentally, but it's the ones that do it purposefully to take people's money, they are the bad ones. So cold reading is when you are sitting across from someone and you are looking at what they're wearing, the way they hold themselves, perhaps their age, perhaps their presenting gender. You're looking at the way they are presenting themselves to the world. And you're going to be tailoring that reading based off the person that's sitting in front of you. So a couple of examples of this would be if you have a young woman sitting in front of you and she is very polite, but she's also very, very quiet. Perhaps she is quite hunched over. She doesn't really want to actively engage with people. She stays to the corners. She maybe doesn't dress in a very expressive way. That, to a cold reader, may be seen as, okay, so she's perhaps lacking a bit of self-confidence. So the reading might then be turned towards, where are you lacking in confidence? What aspects of your life might you need to be building confidence in? So that's kind of one way that this could be taken. Another way would be if you have a middle-aged man sitting across from you. This is quite unusual, as most of the people who go for psychic readings are actually women, or at least female presenting. And you look down at his hands, which are on the table, and you can see there is a tan line where a wedding ring used to be. So you've got a man who perhaps looks quite tired. He's at a location where he probably wouldn't normally go. Perhaps he looks a little bit uncomfortable in case someone sees that he's in here and he's missing that wedding ring. Your reading might then be, oh, it's a love reading. What has happened in the past? What difficulties has been going on? Will they come back to you? You know, it might sway the reading that way. And so it's really easy to see how super quickly just the way someone looks might influence what's happening. Another way this might occur is through the way that someone is engaging back with you. So a lot of readers will say, don't give me any information, don't talk to me, don't say anything to me, just let me do the reading. And that's because inadvertently, a lot of people receiving that reading, a lot of clients want to help. And the urge to help can sometimes actually hinder. So when things come through to say a medium or a psychic, they might be saying to you, oh, I've got someone who's coming through, and it feels like they're holding their chest. And you, as a client, may be like, oh my God, I know exactly who that is, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. You've then given that reader way too much information. And inadvertently, that information could completely sway that medium or that psychic. That person might actually have been a woman. Perhaps it was your great aunt Hilda or something. And instead, immediately you've gone to, oh, I know exactly who this is, and it then sways the reading, even if you don't intend for it to. And you can often spot when people do this is when someone will say, oh, I'm getting a name coming through, I'm getting a name, it begins with J. The client will immediately say, oh my God, it's John. I know John. I loved John. And instead, it might not have actually been John. It's the psychic kind of building a picture. It comes in like levels. It might actually have been Joanne. But by the time they've got that, the name John is already out there and that client is already invested in that. And that's the way the reading is now going. And this kind of cold reading is often inadvertently done. Sometimes it's a great benefit to that reading. The only time it's a real problem is when you've got someone purposefully scamming people out of their money. And this is where hot reading often comes in. So hot reading is often used in combination with cold reading, and it's where the reader is researching the person beforehand. This could be seeing their full name on the booking form for that reading, say they've booked a session with you, and you go to Facebook and you start searching up their profile, and you learn that they recently got a divorce, or they've recently had a child, or they've recently lost their job, and then that information is instrumental in where that reading goes. And the client might be going, oh my God, he knows things that I had never told anyone. And it's because people don't see that social media is real. People don't see that people will look at social media and so they don't even think about it. Or before an event, they might overhear that client talking to their friend about their horrible job. And so that's also hot reading that they can add into the session that they're having. And once again, these things are not necessarily like an awful thing to be done. It's a way of adding context to a reading that's often lacking. However, the wrong people using it will use it to make money off you. And so it's really important to go off word of mouth, go off who is recommended. I work with a lot of psychics and readers on the circuit when I do shows, and a lot of them are really legitimate, and I would go to them every single time if I ever decided to. And there are other readers that I've only ever heard bad things about, and so it's really important to get feedback from people who've been, whether they are friends, family members, or whether they are reviews that you hear just word of mouth. I think that's really, really important. So I know that that was a massive tangent, but it's a topic I've never spoken about, and I thought it could be quite interesting. So at the end of this reading, we end up with a real reading happening. Agatha gets up to leave, and the lady goes, hang on a minute, and she gives a legitimate reading to Agatha, and that's when she knows this woman is the real deal. She does the shtick for the general public, but she is a real witch. And quite quickly it's discovered she doesn't have a lot of money, and she has a lot of bills racking up, and it's a massive problem. Now this lady is called Lalia, or something similar. I honestly have forgotten how to pronounce it. I really apologize. And they get taken into the back room, and she is a divination witch. And Agatha says, like, I can see that you're struggling with money. You've got bills racking up. Look at all these letters. How about you join me on the Witch's Road, and then you will have enough power to get yourself out of this situation. And she goes, hell no, I'm not participating in any of this. She actually says, quote, witches like you are the reason people think we poison apples and steal children and eat babies, end quote. Which, yeah, all the stereotypes of witches that many practitioners still face to this day. The conversation goes on, and Agatha says, quote, don't you miss the glory days? To which Lalia responds, what, when I was chased out of every village I passed through for accurately predicting tragedies? No, I do not. Beat it, end quote. And this once again ties back to the historical information about the witch trials. The majority of the people who were accused of witchcraft actually had nothing to do with witchcraft. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They looked the wrong way, or literally looked the wrong way at someone else, and they were accused of witchcraft. This could be people who were particularly skilled in an art that was considered on the fence as to whether it was acceptable with the religion of the time. This could be women who were multiple times widowed, women who were just single and had never been married, people who lived on the edge of villages, people with varying political beliefs, people who literally looked at you the wrong way. That was a reason so many people were accused of witchcraft, is I had a dream about this person doing something bad, or they looked at me funny, or one of the cases I read, this woman put coals in a bucket of hot water, and because she put coals in a bucket of hot water, she was accused of being a witch. It really was such a minimal thing. And so if you were really good at premonitions, which many people are even today, and you vocalized that to the wrong people, you could really easily end up being accused of witchcraft, and that could be, at most, make you a social pariah. At worst, well, you know what happened to the witches who were actually sentenced for witchcraft. So as mentioned, she's a divination witch, and Agatha specifically says we need a divination witch. They need to cover their bases for what they're going to come across on the Witch's Road. Now, types of witches is seen within modern witchcraft. These types, though, aren't something that you are born into. They're not something that you are by default going to settle into. Instead, they are descriptions of your magical practice. And it doesn't have to include all of your magical practice, just the majority of it. So an example of this would be if you have someone who spends a lot of time in the garden, they love nurturing the plants that they're going to be using in witchcraft, they grow it all themselves, they drink a lot of herbal teas for desired intentions, they dry their own herbs, they create their own incenses, they add it into their cooking, they use herbs in almost all of their magical practice, they might be considered a green witch, which is someone who predominantly works with the natural world and growing their own plants and using them in spells and rituals. If you have someone who primarily carries out their magical practice on the astral plane through the art of astral projection, they might be considered an astral witch. If they also include the natural world into their practice, they might be considered a hedge witch because they are riding the hedge both physically and metaphorically. They are working with the natural world and the natural environment, but they are also jumping that hedge, crossing that hedge, riding that hedge in a sense of astral projection, which is another term for this style of practice. If you have someone who primarily works at the beach with the ocean and all of their deities are ocean deities and they work with the spirits of the sea, then they would be considered a sea witch. If a sea witch then decided that they actually didn't want to do that anymore and they wanted to become a green witch, that's something you can definitely do. The title fits the magical practitioner, not the other way around. So my channel is called HearthWitch because I predominantly practice hearth witchcraft, and therefore for other people I would be a hearth witch. Now, a divination witch is one that predominantly works with divination in the majority of their spells and rituals. So they may carry out tarot on a regular basis, daily, weekly, whatever it is that works well for them. They might carry out tarot or other forms of divination before all of their spells and rituals, as well as afterwards. They might work with the archetypal figures of a tarot deck or with the energies of, for instance, the Ogham trees, or perhaps with the energies of the different rune stones. They may work with deities and spirits that are associated with divination. They might use these as power points, energy points during spells and rituals to focus on their energy. So for instance, if you want to bring about metamorphosis, you might want to work with the magician card. If you are wanting to work with the hidden aspects of yourself, you might want to work with the moon card. These kind of figures can be used during meditations. They can be used as focal points during spells and rituals. You can add small versions or copies of the cards into spells and rituals, not for resale, only for personal use, into little bags that you are creating, little dolls that you are creating, into lockets that you are wearing, things that you are carrying as a way of adding that energy into your working space. There's a lot going on there, but specifically, she is a divination witch. And while they're all standing there arguing, discussing this, she kind of gets taken over in a way. She goes into a trance-like state and begins what's known as automatic writing. Now, I'm hoping you realise why I said that I'm going to have to split this video up into lots and lots of episodes, because there is so much going on here. So automatic writing. Okay, let's start with trance-like states. So a trance state is also known as an altered state of consciousness, and they're often reached through meditation, through astral projection. People will use drumming and rhythmic beats in order to do that. Sometimes it involves dancing. There's lots of different ways to do it, but they allow you to tune into different wavelengths, different planes of existence, like the astral plane, to gain information and insight and the like. Now, automatic writing is where you either purposefully or inadvertently permit a spirit or entity to use you to document information. And so what will often happen is, if you're doing it purposefully, you will allow a spirit to work with, say, your arm or your hand from like the wrist down. And you will have a piece of paper. Some people use big notebooks for this. And you essentially allow yourself to go into a trance-like state. You tune out and your hand is just writing or drawing or sketching. And people have done amazing things during this process. Writing in languages that they don't understand, writing information that they would never possibly know. Handwriting completely changes, spelling completely changes. All these things are really unusual. And it can be done accidentally, so you can enter this just by having a trance-like state and holding a pen over paper and just not knowing any of the spirits involved. This is a little bit hazardous though, because you are permitting a spirit to use your physical form, so I would recommend always having protections up. But if you're doing this purposefully, you can call on a familiar spirit, you can call on a guide, a deity. specific spirits that you choose to actively work with to gain information. You can ask questions, or they can just come through to you with a bunch of information, and it can be incredible. Some people will do drawings, some people will write like massive essays. I actually know someone who has like written books. Like the spirits just come through and they just give us so much information that it's like books worth of information. And so that appears to be what's happening here, where she is writing down the names of the other witches they need for this to work. And then she snaps out of it. And as she snaps out of it, she says, the Three of Pentacles. Now, Three of Pentacles is a tarot card. And this actually happens in several episodes, so I'm going to mention it again as we go through, and hopefully you'll kind of see a picture building up. But the Three of Pentacles is a card of hard work, craftsmanship, working together. It is about being able to acknowledge other people's skills and abilities, about being able to work as a group, about being able to understand the skill of an individual in the collective result. And I think that's really significant. Well, it's obviously really significant, or they wouldn't have added it in. They need a series of different witches for this to work, and each witch needs to be different. They need to have a different skill set. So this card is really about understanding that other people have different skills, and they are all significant. When they're leaving the shop, we see the first of what I would consider to be an omen, which would be a raven in this case, which is sitting and watching them intently. And this does get repeated later on with a coyote as well. I think there's another animal in there too that I'm forgetting. But I actually believe that these are a little bit more than omens. I actually think that these might be either familiars or fetches for the Salem 7. Now, I'm going to kind of briefly mention this now because I think this will be important in later episodes. I mean, I don't see why they would add it in if it wasn't. Now, when we're looking historically, we see fetches appearing quite a lot. And actually, we see this in the witch trials specifically as the reason why some people were accused and arrested of practicing witchcraft. Now, there's a couple of ways that this will present, and I think it's really important to have the context that for a lot of people, dreamlike states were considered just as real as waking life. And that's something that can be confusing when we're reading the trial records today, is that we think, well, it was a dream, so it wasn't real. But we have to think of the mindset of the people involved. So an animal would come through to them in a dream. They would see this animal in a dream. That animal might transform into a person and they would recognize who that person was. Or they might follow that animal, for instance, and it might take them back to the home of someone that they knew. And then the next day they would accuse that person of being a witch and sending their fetch after them. Another example of this are the stories of animals that appear in someone's house at night, and when that animal is injured, the following day, this person that they believe to be the witch is injured in the exact same place as the animal was injured. One of the stories that I remember most vividly was that of a rabbit. A rabbit was hit on the leg, and then the next day, the witch in question also had the same injury in the same place on the same leg, and so she was accused of being a witch. A fetch is a portion of yourself that is sent out from your body, often in the form of an animal, and it was designed to do your bidding in a way. So it could gain information, it could do what's known as remote viewing, where you are seeing something while not actually being there. They could gain literally dirt on all of the villagers and then come back and give you all of that information. They can help you energetically while you work physically. They're like an unusual mix between a familiar and a servitor, because they can do so many of the roles that a spirit familiar can, but they are still attached to your energy. And the danger of it is, if anything happens to the fetch, you will often feel it as an individual. And so it's making me wonder that perhaps it could be a fetch type situation for the Salem 7. Now, I don't know that, don't take that as gospel, please, but that's kind of what I immediately got from this. They could also be familiars and omens, so animal omens are a really common thing, but familiars are something that's really associated with the witch trial period. Usually it was complete misunderstanding, so things that were just found around houses like rats and toads and cats were often deeply associated with witches, much like cauldrons and pointed hats and broomsticks are, but they were just commonplace household items, and these animals were also just commonplace around the home. So it could really be a range of things. I'm kind of leaning more towards the idea of it being a fetch though. I think that would be particularly interesting if it is. We then move on to finding the next witch, and they find it in the form of Jen. Now, Jen works as a candle seller, sort of. She essentially is selling probiotic candles that you can eat. And this is where I'm going to say here, I'm just going to plant the seed. Every single one of the witches that is going to join this coven is a modern stereotype of a witch. And this blew my mind. So episode 1, we have Agatha. She is a very witchy person. She dresses a certain way. She's very proud about it. She wears the necklaces. She's very open cloaks and all of this kind of stuff. We then have Teen, who is a very angsty teenager. I'm going to wear the ripped jumper with the pentagram sewn on it and looks a very certain type of way. We then have Lilia, who is the stereotype of a fortune teller. She wears the shawl, she wears the dozens of rings, and there's lots of bells everywhere, and it's a very classic stereotype. We then have Jen, who is a new age spiritual love and light. I'm going to wear all pink. This will help your yoni. Here's a yoni egg for you. This kind of stereotype of modern day witchy boss babe, where she's essentially like a vegan, very green loving, health conscious social media person. Another stereotype. And as we go through meeting the other witches, you will see that that stereotype continues with the other witches. Each member of this coven is a modern stereotype. And I think that is genius. Whoever came up with that idea, you are phenomenal. Because it's so true. Like, these witches are attempting to gain their power back by walking the road. They have a long history that's mentioned time and time again with the witch trials and everything that each individual has dealt with. And then now they're minimized to being just a fraction of their original selves. They're being put in these stereotypical boxes. And that is just absolutely incredible. Now, Jen has actually been bound, so this means that her power is not accessible to her anymore, and this is one of the reasons that she ends up joining the group to walk the road, because Agatha says, you know, don't you want the power that you once had back again? I can unbind you if we get this power. And so Jen decides to join the group. Now, binding spells are something that we also see in real-world witchcraft. They can be used in many different ways for many different intentions, and people often think that a binding spell is just one thing, but it really isn't. A binding spell is designed to contain something, so this is often to trap or to bind, but what it is that you are binding is going to very much vary. One of my most popular videos on my channel actually was a binding spell I did years and years ago, and that was designed to bind bad habits. So that style of a binding is designed to stop bad habits, to stop people who are causing other people harm, to give them a pause to say, okay, well, I can't do this right now, so I'm going to rethink my actions. You can also use a binding spell to bind two people together. So this is often done during hand fasting celebrations. It's done by committed couples and the like, as well as other people with perhaps less positive intentions. And then we also have the way that it has happened to Jen here, where a binding spell is done to stop you from having access to your own energy or the energy around you. So sometimes it can essentially cut ties between the energy that's in the space, so you can't feel it anymore. So it's one style of working, but there's multiple different ways that you can take it. And then again, we have the same kind of jokey reference to the witch trial period, where Jen says, quote, historically, we as a group don't do well in courtrooms, end quote. And I thought that was just so good because, yeah, a lot of the time, especially at the start of the witch trials, you had a lot of people where it didn't matter what you said, you were guilty, and that's how this was going to work. And people were often tortured to gain confessions. And while I think it's important to bear in mind that in North America and in England and Scotland, and Wales didn't actually really have witch trials, it just skipped Wales entirely, we see that torture was not permitted. Instead, what was done was sleep deprivation and often starvation, and so that was one way of doing it. If you were in the Holy Roman Empire, however, it could get bad. I mean, I'm not going to go very in-depth into it, but let's face it, I would probably not be able to have nail polish on my nails right now because I probably wouldn't have nails anymore. And so under these conditions, both sides, you're likely to admit to anything. If you've not slept in day after day after day, or if you're enduring severe pain, you're likely to say whatever it is the person doing it is going to want you to say. And so it didn't matter whether you were innocent or guilty. It didn't matter how good your defense was in the courtroom. A lot of the time, if they believed you were guilty, they were going to find you guilty. Though I will say that towards the latter end of the witch trial period, this did not happen the same. You had judges that were like, what are we doing here? This is ridiculous. Everyone go home. It's really just this heightened period of the hysteria kind of at the start to the middle that we see this really extreme response. The next witch they're looking for is actually what's referred to as a blood witch. Now I'm using the little quotations here because it means something very different in the show as it does to real life. What they're actually referring to in the show is Alice, who is the child of a witch, which in our style of modern witchcraft would be considered a hereditary witch. So a hereditary witch is someone that has ancestry in witchcraft. So they have been taught by their mother or their grandmother or their grandfather, or they have a history of witchcraft in their family. Alice, however, is not only the child of a witch, but she's also a protection witch. And that is what they're primarily focusing on. Now, her mother is actually believed to have been lost while traveling the road. And so her incentive is to find out what happened to her mother. She is also another stereotype of a modern witch, which is this goth alternative look with the eyeliner, with the hair, with the clothing. It's this additional stereotype. Now, I forgot to mention this while I was filming, but a blood witch actually means something different in the real world as well. A blood witch is a practitioner who primarily works with blood in their magics. This could be in the form of divination. This could be to add it into magical mirrors and the liquid condensers that are used for that purpose. It could be using blood as a taglock or as a power addition to your workings. Blood, especially when it is tied into alchemy, is akin to using gold. And so it is incredibly powerful for improving the energy of a working and maintaining that energy long term. And so blood witches will primarily work with, as mentioned, blood. It is important, though, that anyone who is interested in doing this does so very, very carefully and safely. This could be what's known as moon blood. I'm sure some of you will likely know what that is without me having to explain it. It can also be blood that's taken from the skin, but it should always be done with great care and attention. They all gather together at Agatha's house to start the ceremony, essentially to summon the road, because the road isn't a physical place. I would say it's more akin to an astral journey that they need to be going on. The road has to be summoned, but they don't have enough people. Now, Lilia refers to Jen as a high priestess, and while this isn't like a big thing, it is significant to me, not to the show. So I just want to mention that high priestess is a term that is used to describe a senior member of a coven, typically. So you would have a high priestess and you would have a priest. And these would usually have significant roles within rituals, whether they were Sabbath rituals, Esbat rituals, or just general working rituals. They would often represent the goddess and the horned god in workings if you fall within the Wiccan tradition, or they would represent the two leaders of that particular working. Now, the high priestess and the priest don't necessarily need to be the same people every single time, though they can be. The role is often alternated between different practitioners depending on what they are particularly good at. So if you're doing a working that involves fire magic, then having someone who works very strongly with the fire element, be the high priestess, is going to be really useful. Whereas in some covens, it is the most senior members. They aren't better than the rest of the group. They are not considered on a pedestal. Instead, they are perhaps the more knowledgeable members of the group, and so they will instead lead that ritual so that everyone knows what they're doing. And then people will start taking it in turns as things go on. Different covens are going to behave differently, but that's just my experience. They are, however, missing a witch. And so Agatha has to go out and she has to find Sharon. Now, Sharon is actually a character from the WandaVision series. She was called Mrs. Hart, I believe, in the original series. She's actually called Sharon in this one because during the WandaVision series, everyone had different names. And she is yet another stereotype of a witch. So she is the slightly ditzy, slightly batty, middle-aged-ish woman who loves gardening. And she spends so much time on her knees and she's got dirt all over her and it's like in her hair and everything. And she is yet another stereotype of a witch. She, however, doesn't know that she's a witch. So she's invited over under the guise of Agatha having a party. And then they're finally all ready and they can start walking the road. Now, as mentioned, the road is not a physical place. It is instead something that is conjured or summoned, and to do that, they sing the song, The Witch's Road. And oh boy, do I just know that this song is going to be used in coven meetings, for astral work, for trance work, for years to come. I just know that in like 10 years' time, you're going to be listening to a playlist of witchy music, and The Witch's Road is going to be on there. It is a song that has been created for the show that tells the story of the Witch's Road and what is required in order to reach the end of it safely. And it is really powerful, actually, this scene. They go into the basement and they're all singing this song together, and it is like shivers everywhere, like goosebumps. Even just thinking about it, I'm like broken out in goosebumps everywhere. It is so cool. And at the end of it, this door is appeared right before them on the floor. And this is the start of their journey to the Witch's Road as the Salem Seven start attacking them. And so all of them, including Teen, go onto the Witch's Road below. They walk down the spiral staircase, and there's no going back now. Once you start, you cannot go back to where you came. It is essentially a pathworking exercise, which is what it would be referred to within witchcraft now, where you are going on a journey. You are journeying inwards and astrally as a way of achieving information, knowledge, self-growth and development. It's one of these topics, and it's recommended at the very end of the episode that they remove their shoes to walk the road. And this is typically done to have a deeper connection to the natural world, to feel the energy of the space more and to be more grounded. And that is the end of episode 2. As you can see, there is a lot going on here, like a lot. And I was going to do this all in one big episode. I've already been filming for 2 hours on the 2 episodes we've spoken about today alone. And so I think we're going to have to break this up. I think I'm going to have to do them in 2-episode increments so that we can work our way through this. But yeah, if you're interested in this, go back and rewatch the episodes and see if you can find any other little Easter eggs or bits that I missed, because I definitely didn't catch them all. And let us know in the comment section any that you see, as well as who your favourite witch is of all of them that we've been introduced to so far. But no spoilers if you've seen it all. Zip, keep it to yourself until the next series of episodes, and then we can keep talking about it. But yeah, I'm absolutely blown away. There is only one show that is more detailed than Agatha All Along, and that is The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. If you haven't seen my videos on that, I will leave them linked. Which corner is it? This corner. I will leave them linked just up here, as well as down in the comment section. No, the description box. If you'd like to check out more, because we've talked about the craft, we've talked about practical magic, we've talked about the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I've also talked about Lockwood & Co. if you are interested in the ghostiness of it all. And yeah, let me know if you enjoyed this video by giving it a like. It really means a lot to me. Your support massively means so much to me. And if you did enjoy this video or the content on this channel, feel free to hit subscribe. I try to post magical content every single week, and more videos just like this will be coming out in the coming weeks. So with that being said, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have a marvelous magical day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! Oh no, I had lipstick on my teeth that entire video. I am so hoping that you couldn't see that. I'm not filming this again. It's not happening. If you saw lipstick on my teeth, no, you didn't. You didn't see anything. I will deny it. Gosh darn. This is why I don't wear stick lipstick to film in.